When you hear the phrase hard heart, who do you think of? Now, if you're thinking of that phrase being used in the Bible, well, Pharaoh is probably the first one that comes to mind. It talks about Pharaoh hardening his heart when Moses was saying, "Let my people go," and his heart being hardened, even God hardening his heart, which can just be God did things and Pharaoh responded to it that way. But he certainly would be the first one for most people. Maybe the Israelites in the wilderness, Gentiles. The Bible uses that phrase, hard heart, in reference to all of them. But in the Gospel of Mark, the phrase in some form is used 5 times. Once it is used of looking back on the Israelites in the wilderness. Once it's used of the Pharisees, and neither one of those is surprising. But 3 times it's used of another group. You know, who is this terrible group that have hard hearts? Well, in chapter 6, verse 52, it says, "For they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened." Chapter 8, verse 16, "And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, 'Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened?'" Now, it hasn't mentioned them specifically, but you see who it's talking about? Last one brings it out, chapter 16, verse 14. "Afterward, Jesus appeared to the 11 themselves as they were reclining at table, and he rebuked them for their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who saw him after he had risen." Wow, this group that it's used of, this phrase, more than anyone else in the Gospel of Mark, it's Jesus' own disciples. It's those 12 men that he picked to be his closest followers, to build as the foundation of the church. You know, you look at these other groups and they were opposed to God. You know, throughout the history, certainly the Pharisees, they're even wicked. You know, the Gentiles and everything they did. But here's the disciples. So that, you know, might raise a question. Well, what's hard heart mean? It doesn't then inherently mean the person is wicked, outwardly opposed to God. Well, a hard heart, I would describe it as being closed to evidence. And it fits in totally with what I often say, this progression, this biblical progression from our mind to our heart to our will. You know, what I understand in my mind and believe, and then my heart commits to living accordingly, and my will makes the moment-by-moment decisions, hopefully, to do that. That doesn't always happen. Well, we talked about some why that doesn't happen in following your heart. This one talks about the fact that a hard heart means that my mind receives the evidence, and if it was just the mind making this decision, I should accept it, I should agree with it, but my heart refuses to. It can sort of override or veto that because I just don't want it. To some degree, I don't want to accept that evidence, and so I'll probably say it's not true. I'll probably find some way of dismissing it. That's what a hard heart is. The big thing here to realize, and we're going to spend a few videos looking at this, is that means that any follower of God, true followers, not just the Pharisees who claimed we're following God, but a true follower, a true Christian today, I can have a hard heart. I can be someone who, and again, for me, if I'm a Christian, a follower, I've accepted God, accepted Jesus, but it means I come along later and I'm reading something, or I hear a sermon or a lesson, and it talks about maybe humility, talks about commitment, talks about something, and I find some way, even though what I hear I should agree with, like, okay, I need to be more humble. I'm not committed like I should be. Whatever the case is, my heart finds a way to say, no, it doesn't apply to you. No, that's not talking, not talking to me. I'm doing okay. I'm fine. And so it's closed to that evidence. That's where the disciples were. They certainly were committed to Jesus, but as things were happening, they saw things happen. The evidence was there, but their hearts wouldn't accept it for what it was, wouldn't take it and, then apply it in the sense of, okay, here's what it should mean. Here's what I should do. Here's how it should change my commitment, my relationship with God. That same thing can happen to you and me. And one key element of this, and we're going to see it as we look throughout, anyone can have a hard heart and not know it. In fact, that's almost integral to having this hard heart. Is anyone says, okay, yes, I have a hard heart. I'm opposing God. I know the evidence should lead me this way, but I refuse to, God. No, there's this element also of not knowing it, of rationalizing somehow. And certainly the fact of sin's deception and Satan being the deceiver plays into all of that. I'm able to somehow think, yes, I'm following God, I'm committed to God. Here's this that if I just accepted it at the mind level should tell me there's something needs changing. But my heart is closed, my heart is hard, and says, no, that's not me because of this, and I rationalize it, I'm deceived by it. And I mentioned that series, Following Your Heart. One of the warning signs is I want something more than I want God, because I keep doing things that go against what I say I want. So I would encourage you, if you haven't looked at that series, to do so. As we get ready to move on to these next ones, one thing I would say is, take a different approach to this than you might not think. Instead of, asking, do I have a hard heart? Assume I do. Since it's so easy to have, anyone can have it and not know it. Let's assume I do and work from that basis. Okay, let's examine to see in what ways it's affecting me, because we're going to see it is extremely serious. That's going to be the focus of the next lesson. I don't want to be missing, to any degree, how much my heart is hard because I'm assuming I don't have it. Let's assume I do, and then begin to humbly examine. And the action steps today, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about it some more as we go. Thanks.